So, Chrissie, it's great to be chatting with you as always. I always appreciate our conversations. And I wanted to talk today about the interaction of suicidality and OCD and, the hopeless place, despairing place that OCD can put us into, and to draw upon your expertise working with clients and also your own lived experience of this, and to hopefully offer some hope and some practical tools and ideas. I will say up front, this is obviously not therapy, not advice that we're sort of saying you should follow in in the replacement of actual therapeutic support. And also, I wanted to caveat for anyone with suicidal OCD, which is we'll probably get into as we talk, but it's where we might be having intrusive thoughts about worries and concerns and doubts around suicide, and then we might be doing our mental compulsions and physical compulsions about suicide. So if you're someone in that place, and if you're really struggling with that, get specialist OCD treatment, get someone who understands suicidal OCD. Please don't use this video as reassurance and checking and a source of compulsion. Seek help. But really, today we want to cover the interaction of OCD and suicide. But yeah, as I said, we're providing support and hope here. If anyone is in a really tough place, uh, the point we really want to make today is you should be seeking support from professional services, crisis support in the UK, your GP, your local crisis teams, hospitals if needed. You should be seeking support from people who understand and can help. I know from a lot of clients I work with, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Chrissy, that people might have very bad experiences with those services and may have had very tough times there, but that can really vary on who you see and who you end up with. So it's worth pursuing and trying that again, even if you've had bad experiences. You can find very compassionate support there. Also, your own social support, your own network, and very specifically working with a therapist that understands this. So I just want to say all of that up front. There might be more we say as we go on. Um, but yeah, is there anything you would like to say up front, Chrissy, just to sort of lay the groundwork for what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, and thank you, of course, for having me on, Johnny. I love being able to have chats with you. I think they're really meaningful, and we understand that lived experience piece and the need for compassion and empathy for what people struggle with. No, I think that's all good information. I think that I'm really excited to talk about this because I think I have a unique experience of being someone that did survive a suicide attempt because of how terrible my OCD got, but then also to have suffered from suicidal OCD theme.
Yeah.
Um, and also, I was hospitalized as well, and it was not a good experience for me. But like Johnny's saying, um,
Not the first to make that that link.
the
I
first
was getting
part.
that joke in junior school.
Um, but there I do have, when I was hospitalized and severely suicidal and had made an attempt, I'm very grateful, even though the hospitalization was not, the best experience of my life. I was grateful to be in a place where I was safe. Because, to be so deeply entrenched in a dark and and also stuck in my head with these thoughts, overall, to be in a spot knowing I had support, knowing I was being watched, even as scary as that can sound, but to be somewhere I knew I was safe until I could stabilize was really important, and one of the main reasons why I'm here with you today. I mean, if I had not been hospitalized, I don't know if I would have attempted again and would have been successful that time. So,
Yeah.
hospitalization is scary and sometimes can be not ideal, but when you need to be safe, sometimes it is the best solution until you can regulate and get back on your feet.
Yeah, and all the research on suicidality is that those intense peaks are shorter term. You can obviously be feeling very suicidal for longer periods of time, but the actual strong impulses are sort of shorter lived. So if you can be kept safe, as you're describing, and you can get through that period, your insight perspective, things may start to come back and it may look very differently. So I love what you're saying there, to have that, team keeping you safe. And hear very mixed things over here. I hear people who have had good support as well. I hear, really difficult times and invalidating experiences, but also some really positive and supportive ones. And I think it just depends on the clinicians you end up with and the people
Right.
around you. And but I think, like you're saying, just to sometimes have a safe period and then time to get through that crisis moment,
Right.
that's worth all the trickiness that could go along with it.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I think your lived experience of having survived a suicide attempt, being in that place, and then dealt with suicidal OCD, is a unique position and something very helpful for people. I mean, for myself, at my worst times with OCD, I felt very suicidal. It became an inevitable outcome in my mind. I wasn't actively planning at that point, but my mind, I was having suicidal thoughts all day, and it was feeling more and more inevitable, and I was having impulses at times. And I also had suicidal OCD, so I also had times where it was more an anxious presentation, and I was more afraid of what my mind was doing. And then sometimes a gray area where it was like I was having depression and passive suicidal thoughts that I didn't want to act on, but then my OCD was latching onto that and it was sort of interacting. So I think for us to unpick that would be helpful. So is there anything else you would want to share? I mean, you've told your story, you've been really honest and open and shared your story in lots of places, and that in itself is such a courageous thing and such a helpful thing. Is there anything you would want to say from that timeline that you think would be helpful today?
Well, I think that the topic of suicide is, well, first of all, it's a taboo topic. So I consider
Hmm.
suicide to be a taboo, intrusive thought when you're
Hmm.
having that OCD theme. But I also think, just like any inflammatory word, suicide is still one of those words that if you're talking to someone who's not in the field or used to talking about it, they will lower their head and lower their voice when they say it.
Yeah.
And one of the things I feel like that was a detriment to me when I did attempt, and this was way back in 1997, 98, right around that time, is there wasn't any normalization of the feelings of wanting to die. Um,
Mm.
and the fear is all of the unhealthy myths about suicide. If you talk about suicide, people are going to get it in their mind and they're going to do it. I mean, if suicide is going to come into your mind, you don't have to talk about it, to have it come into your mind or do it.
Yeah.
And I think that in my upbringing, suicide, along with a lot of other topics, were off the table. And I'm certainly not blaming my upbringing or my family, but I do think if there had been more discussions, more use of the word suicide, more understanding and empathy toward people who were suicidal or who had attempted or completed suicide, that it would have
Mm.
been different and I would have had a place to come to talk about it when I
Mm.
was feeling suicidal. A lot of people believe that suicide is selfish. A lot of people believe that, and I think it's the same way that people don't understand OCD. If you've never been in a place where suicide feels like your only way out, it's easy to stand on the soapbox and say that it's selfish. Majority, this is anecdotal, but I'm just going to say it. And what I'm saying is I've heard this from my clients, and how I feel. Majority of the clients that I talk to about suicide, if they have been, are saying they would rather die in a selfless way than
Mm.
burden their family. And when they were
Yeah.
in that mindset, it was more the opposite of what people think that it is. So I'm saying all this to preface that after I attempted suicide and was hospitalized and it became very hush hush in my family. I spent the next over a decade in silence about it. And the shame was so huge around the attempt and the fact that I even thought that, thought those things, and how could I do that to my family and blah, 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 which I wasn't doing anything to my family. That was their perception. Um, After that, when I relapsed and became suicidal again, I decided to change my relationship with suicide, like the word suicide, having suicidal thoughts, and feeling suicidal. And
Mm.
mainly, I started speaking openly about my suicide attempt, and even just like we do in ERP, saying the word suicide over and over and over and over, changed the stigma, changed, how inflammatory it was for me. And
Yeah.
I also recognized that people would mirror me when I talk about suicide. If I'm talking about it very confidently about my attempt, and, they will mirror how I talk about it. So I don't lower my head and I don't lower my voice. Um, and also, I started to notice that when I was experiencing OCD, my brain tends to go to, you could just kill yourself. You could go through with it this time. It's not this is not suicidal OCD theme. This is me really feeling suicidal.
Yeah.
And I've just learned that, because one of I would say my major core fear is being trapped. And
Mm.
OCD makes me feel trapped. And one of
Mm.
the things I've learned is when I am becoming suicidal and looking at that as a way out, that's my brain's way of looking for solutions
Yeah.
from the fear of being trapped like this forever.
Yeah.
And when I realized that and thought to myself, okay, then every time I'm suicidal, I don't have to call my parents and panic them or call a mental health professional. I can just say, okay, this is my brain's way of trying to find a solution because I am feeling really trapped and scared right now, and I'm usually feeling a lot of doom. So
Yeah.
that to me was the indication you need to get to work. You need to do some
Hmm.
ERP. This has gotten serious enough for you um, to really, take action to get through whatever you're going through with OCD.
Mm.
So changing my relationship with how I feel about the word and about how I feel when I'm actually suicidal, um, it
Mm.
it went from panicking, to, okay, this is an indicator. This is great information for me. And
Yeah.
so now moving forward, if I'm ever suicidal, I just think to myself, I mean, I will say it's not a fun experience, especially at like the witching hour at
Mm.
like 3 and 4 in the
Mm.
morning when you're like, you could just end it
Mm.
now. I really
Mm.
just say
Yeah.
to myself, things are going to look different tomorrow when the light is shining and when I can sit down and make a plan. And that gives me agency over those feelings and agency over the fears that I could snap and act on it, which then now we're getting into OCD
Mm.
territory of
Yeah.
what if you snap in the middle of the night and go grab your gun and kill yourself? Well, I then have agency and say, I'm not going to do that tonight. But,
Yeah.
why don't we reevaluate in the morning when it's light and
Mm.
I can sit down and create a plan? So,
Mm.
and I do try to empower the clients that I work with, my peers, to change their relationship. Where is that bias lying? Where is the stigma lying for you when it comes to
Yeah.
suicide? Where's the shame? Because typically, we're going to say, like, what kind of person wouldn't appreciate life? It's not about appreciating life. I
No. No.
appreciate life, but when I'm trapped and scared,
Yeah.
my brain wants to escape and it doesn't know how. And so
Mm.
it is definitely, kind of poking me going, we're in a really low spot and it's time for you to kind of take control of the brain again, right? And
Yeah.
instead of, going down into that fear spiral, okay, now it's time for you to step up and take some control and have some agency over this.
Mm. Yeah. So I really love the points you made. I mean, I think the first one around, destigmatizing, if we can have a supportive family that are not so afraid of this, or supportive friends and people around us that normalize. I mean, one statistic that, a lot I learned about suicidal sort of psychology was from Kirk Strozal, who's one of the people who developed ACT, acceptance, commitment therapy with Steve Hayes, and he's called a suicidologist. So his main focus is suicide. That's his life, his sort of career has been on that. And he talks about, there's a statistic which is 50% of people will have at least a 2 week period in their life where they seriously consider suicide. So that's half the people. It's much higher that people will have suicidal thoughts because, as you said, it's the brain problem solving pain and trying to find a solution. And it's an obvious solution. There can be different functions, there can be other things going on, but that's obviously one of the sort of functions of it, and really for us to understand and normalize all of that. And another thing that Kirk talks about, which you're really validating, is he talks about these three I's of suicidality. So that we believe the state is intolerable, interminable, and inescapable. So intolerable, I can't bear it. Interminable, it'll be never ending. And inescapable, there's nothing I can do to improve it. And what we try to do in ACT is actually challenge each of those parts. So actually, we are underestimating what we can bear and what we can work with and what we can tolerate, especially if we have social support, kind, compassionate people with us. We have a skill set to work on these symptoms. We train our attention, we train our ability to interact with our thoughts differently. Actually, it becomes very tolerable. Interminable, well, nothing is never ending. Actually, suicidal periods can last long, but the kind of peaks of them are short-lived and pass very quickly. Well, not necessarily very quickly, but some of the research does say they're quicker to pass. Um, and so even of its own, it won't be never ending. It will always be a period of time that takes care of itself, even if you do nothing. Obviously there'll be exceptions. There's people that may live in that state much longer, but that's often because of the rumination and what we're doing in response to it that is keeping it going rather than
Hmm.
the actual state itself. And that even the worst, I mean, for me, when I was in the worst levels of depression, when I started to work on it, and I paid close attention with my mindfulness skills, I noticed that it wasn't maximum intensity all the time. There was small fluctuation. Even when it was at its worst, there was a bit of fluctuation there. And like as I paid attention to that more, it's almost like the waves of it got more so. And then it was it was easier to see that actually there became gaps in it, and it did start to, there'd be periods of time it wasn't on my mind. And inescapable, there are things we can always do. We can get social support, we can do lifestyle factors that will, the correlation between sleep disturbance and suicidality. If we can, not to put pressure on sleep, you can't say, set up a worry, if I can't sleep, I'm going to become suicidal. But can we set up the right conditions to rest and at least be
Right.
in a place where we're resting, even if we're not sleeping? And there's a lot we could say on that. And exercise, all these things, there will be stuff that do make it more escapable in those moments. So yeah, it sounds like you were sort of experiencing and have experienced those three eyes.
Well, and I also wanted to say that just to validate your or reiterate your point is there are all kinds of factors when it gets so acute. One of the
Mm,
more interesting things about my suicide attempt was it was it was like it funneled to the worst possible time. I was already
mm,
experiencing some pretty severe depression, and it was the end of my junior year. We were on the quarter system then, and so in college, and so I was going into an 8 week break
mm,
of having to go home in like very deep symptoms of OCD. I didn't know it was OCD back then. It was like 1997, so no internet except AOL dial-up. And I wasn't about to Google. Like, well, there was no Google. I wasn't about to get on AOL and say like, what are these crazy thoughts? But like I also, so everything was ending. I was going to be home for 2 months. So I was dreading not having anything to do, no distractions. I ran cross country and cross country season had ended in November. So that was kind of like that intense exercise had ended. And
mm,
then of course, going into Christmas season, there's all this pressure, to be happy, and I was not happy. And the most interesting thing is that I attempted suicide, and the next day I started my period.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's
massive
also
factor.
worth
Yeah,
mentioning is that I
yeah.
remember getting into the hospital and I had to have surgery after my attempt and sitting, like going to the bathroom and sitting down and being like, oh my God, if I had just waited
Mm,
one more day, this might
mm,
have this might
mm,
have let up a little bit. And then the sleep
mm.
factor, I will say, and again, not to put pressure on people who are not sleeping well, but I was in such a severe depression that I was not sleeping. And I know that we say,
Mm,
oh, when you're depressed, you sleep all the time. It was the very opposite
yeah,
for me. I
yeah,
was up
yeah,
all night, every night, just
yeah,
staring at the clock, which was, of course,
yeah.
making my intrusive thoughts worse. And I didn't know what was going on. And then it was making the depression worse. And of course, by the time I wouldn't say that I was having symptoms of psychosis, but I certainly was not
Mm,
rational in
yeah,
anything that I was thinking of at that point. And I
yeah,
did, and to boot, I wasn't telling anyone anything. I was, none of my family knew, which is
yeah.
bizarre to me. Like in
Mm,
hindsight, they
mm,
said, well, you seemed a little off. And it's like, seemed a little
mm,
off. Like it was
yeah.
very obvious something was very wrong. But again, I grew up in a family where you don't talk about these things. And so even if there were concerns, it would likely be, oh, she'll just get over it. Oh, she's just sad
Mm,
or whatever. There was no language to talk about it with them. And the fear that I had of going to them and saying, I'm thinking about killing myself every single day. I
mm,
just kept hanging on to that. I was also had religious scrupulosity. So and this is where it did get into a little delusional stuff, is I truly believed that God was punishing me and that
mm,
he was the
mm.
one that wanted me to die. So I know it's getting a
Mm.
little like wonky here, but I mean, after
That
me,
can happen. Yeah, that can happen. I mean, I often think of it like a metaphor of like a whirlpool where it's pulling people in, and when they're at the top of the whirlpool, it's easier to put the stuff in place, the crisis supports, the social support, that they get in therapy. But as it drags people in, you kind of become not again, not to trigger people with suicidal OCD. This is people in the deep depression when the suicidal thoughts are getting more intense, and it's like there's a dissociative process, and as you go into that whirlpool, your brain isn't thinking straight. Like it starts saying, like you said, I'm a burden. People who love and care for you and really would not want this to happen, you start imagining they would be fine with it, or they could cope with it, or that it wouldn't ruin their life, or other things like that. And you're not in your right mind, and you become quite dissociative. And I think that's where you need so much help at that point as you're sort of going around that whirlpool. It's like you need someone to come in and pull you out of it, and ideally a team of people, and then you can get out of that whirlpool. And then you look at it and you're like, what on earth was going on? I was making these sort of beliefs
right,
about my family, or obviously it's all very complex. You can be in a situation where you don't have these supportive people around you, and there could be other things pulling us into the whirlpool there. But a lot of people I've worked with will start to really see themselves as a burden, and shame, as you said, I think shame is part of that whirlpool. I think really shame is a huge part of almost all the people I've seen who are suicidal. Really to think, I'm not worthy and good enough. Obviously, there can be the escaping pain part, but again, that's often comes together with and I'm not worthy and no one would miss me and I'm not important. And it's like even if the function is to escape the pain, there's shame there because we're not believing that we have the strength to get out of this and to keep going and to do things to work on recovery. So there's like a lot of and the level of self-hatred and self-criticism and the intensity of the inner critic for most people in this place. I mean, obviously, there's always exceptions, and sometimes that critic is going more out at the world and other things. But I feel like shame is such a huge part of it.
I also feel like, and what you said earlier about the burden, they would be
Mhm.
better off if I were gone. For me, It was they would be better off if they knew what was going on in my head.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so with
yeah.
OCD,
Mm.
I think it, especially with taboo intrusive thoughts,
Yeah,
pedophilia theme coming to mind, incest theme,
yeah.
bestiality, things like that.
Real event. Yeah, oh,
Yes,
yeah.
real
Mm.
event, false memory, um, harm intrusive thoughts.
Yeah,
If you haven't even talked to your family about it or no one knows, and you are going through this in isolation, which a lot of people are, that the driving factor is, but if they knew who I really was,
yeah,
they would
yeah,
rather me be dead. And so
yeah,
that
yeah,
is, that's where, oh my gosh, that's where I just want to reach people like right then,
yeah.
right at that thought
Yes,
and be like,
yes,
no.
yes,
But I
yes.
mean, for me, that's what it was. It
Yeah,
was this, but they would be better off if they knew what was going on in my mind. And my brain was telling me that, I mean, I believed from a religious scrupulosity piece, which I also believe is taboo,
mm,
just
mm-hmm.
because of the whole, like, people's beliefs and things like that is, I
Mm,
believed that God was punishing me with
yeah,
intrusive thoughts. And
yeah.
so my dad is a minister. And in my
Mm,
brain, the only way I could make sense of these two things is if my
mm,
father finds out that I'm getting punished by God,
yeah, yeah.
that's going to ruin our family. It's going to ruin
Mm,
everybody's
mm,
image of me. And so there was, of course, I had a level of insight on that. It just seemed
yeah,
nuts when I had insight. But when I
yeah,
didn't have insight, now it's like magical thinking. I'm looking for signs, I'm looking for
yeah,
all this stuff. And, if the
yeah.
signs were delivered, then it's like, oh my God, this really is real. And
Yeah, and if you threat monitor for signs, you're going to see associations. You're going to like there are coincidences. There are, and that's just statistical probability. So you're going to see all of that, right? And then you're in it. Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, you can have the scenario with that where a lot of people might have a supportive family who actually, if they knew and they were psychoeducated about OCD, they wouldn't feel that. But then there are people that do have families that don't believe in mental health, don't believe in OCD, would be perhaps harsh and judgmental. And I'm thinking of that group of people. It's so important to find a clinician that understands this and can help
community
you
that
understand it, a
understands.
community that understands it, peer support, other people with OCD, other people with taboo, intrusive thoughts, so that that becomes your family that can kind of show you that no, this is just an experience you're having. It doesn't define who you are as a person.
Correct.
And it just feels that that's such a important thing for anyone listening to this conversation. If you don't have the people that would understand either the suicidal thoughts you're having or that interaction with OCD, then find those people, reach out and
Right.
get that connection.
Yeah, and I mean, my family is my made up, like my made family, and they
Mm,
are, you and
mm,
like my
mm,
friends and the community that I've created, through my practice. And I can sit here and tell you, if you're listening to this, you absolutely can create that, and you absolutely
yeah,
can be fulfilled.
yeah,
My family, did the best they could to understand OCD, and did to a certain
mm,
extent, but when you don't have that close family support or spousal support or from your partner, you can replace that with
yeah.
support from people who really get it, and that could be absolutely fulfilling.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that's probably a massive theme for our conversation is in some ways you need community to help you heal from this and you need connection to do that. And I think some of the issue is that, I mean, one line of thought on this is that animals don't commit suicide as far as we know, and so it must be a factor of verbal learning, and it's something about our analytical problem solving mind sort of turning in on itself and trying to problem solve the pain. So getting out of that through community is key. Like that's one of the most helpful ways of getting out of this introverted world where we might be ruminating over and over and reinforcing this sense of being stuck, like you were describing. I'm trapped, this will go on forever, it's never going to get easier. Relapse could be part of that. We've talked about that. You go into a relapse, and that then is the evidence you can never recover or never get better. And we need to work on both those mental compulsions, I think, from a skill-based level, but also from a social connection-based level.
Yes, I agree. And again, I think to emphasize, I mean, I would say most people that I meet with OCD, and I've had a couple clinicians confirm this as well, have either had suicidal ideation at some point in their OCD experience or have contemplated or attempted suicide.
Yeah,
And I think that as a community, we need to normalize this.
yeah,
Um, and because again, just to emphasize this point, when we get when we being in the doom and the haze, where you feel like you're disconnected from the world, you're dissociating, the symptoms are really high, the insight's really low. We already feel really scared, and when you throw in suicidal ideation, um
mm,
for me, and I always work with, and talk this through with clients when I'm meeting with them, it's like in that moment you can tell yourself, A, this is just temporary, and B, I can do something about this.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
just like you were saying, Johnny, like from the standpoint of not talking about suicide and the shame that comes along with it, and not feeling like you're trapped or whatever, that's what makes us think, oh my God, this is now happening to me, and there's nothing I can do. There absolutely is something that you can do when you feel suicidal. I mean, first,
mm,
tell somebody.
yeah,
Don't keep it in your head, because that's where the shame brews.
yeah,
Do you have a good friend that you can just say, I don't want you to be alarmed, but I'm feeling suicidal, and I think talking about it is going to make me feel better. Now, this is not confession, by the way, for
yeah,
OCD
yeah,
theme, suicidal theme.
yeah,
But the other thing that you can do is go to an emergency room or a mental health facility. They are going to assess you. And if they think that you're safe, that you're not going to get admitted, right? I mean, but you can at least go there and take the step. And sometimes there's so much relief in just walking in a place that you know you're safe.
yeah,
They're not gonna let you leave until you are safe. And sometimes it's just like, letting the air out of the balloon. I'm gonna
yeah,
walk into a mental health center and talk to someone and see if there's options, see if there's something I can
mm,
do. And then all of a sudden it's like that in itself is a step of agency. I'm
mm,
doing something about my state of mind right now. I'm not just sitting in here hoping it will go away you
yeah,
know and so it's just really important to, and this is not a replacement for treatment if you're really in danger, but the other
mm,
thing is that suicidal ideation coupled with avoidance for OCD is, I'm going to just sit in my house and just think and ruminate.
yeah,
And so when the suicidal ideation comes on, now you're just stuck and you don't leave your house for 4 or 5 days. Get
mm, mm,
out and
yeah,
do something. Get out
yeah,
of your house. And that was one of my biggest issues, Johnny, when I was suicidal, is I went home. Of course, I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know that I had a disorder or anything, but I parked it on the couch, turned the TV on and just sat there for days and days and days. And that
mm,
just, if the few times it broke, but before my suicide attempt, was when I got up and got out of the house and went and did something. And there were
yeah,
moments of clarity of like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm not going to feel like this. Now, in hindsight, I think to
mm,
myself, if I had just done that more,
mm,
I may have had enough breaks where I
yeah,
could have asked for help, or perhaps it could have passed, or like a little bit more time had passed. But I just did
yeah,
myself in, isolating the way that I did, hoping it would go
yeah.
away.
Yes, yes, that's huge. Yeah, I mean, I think the statistics that I'm aware of is that 1 in 10 people with OCD will attempt suicide. So it's much higher than the general population. And suicidal ideation is the kind of around the 47-50%. So it's probably pretty similar across, to the statistic I said, about general people, that actually a lot of people will, I mean, probably that half, the
I bet it's
statistic I
much
said,
higher than that.
well, yeah, it probably is, to be honest. They're not disclosing it, right? They'll not be
They're
talking
just
about it.
not
They're not, yeah.
telling.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And all these statistics you got to take with a pinch of salt. But I was also going to say that original statistic of like half the people will have that suicidal thoughts, period. They're probably all the people suffering with mental health is a big part of that. So it's probably, yeah, much higher levels of OCD. And yeah, I mean, I do work with some clients that really don't have that component, and for whatever reason it just isn't strong. But there's a lot of people that do have the passive one, where they might have strong protective factors, we would call it. So their family, or friends, or the other things are these strong protective factors, but they're still having the thoughts. But then there's obviously a lot of people it gets way more serious for, and then that high statistic of the attempt. And the death by suicide is sort of 1.4%. So it's a significant number. And we've talked about it before. It's got to be a lot of people with taboo OCD that think,
Absolutely.
that's the population I often see will say these things to me. If this is true, I'm going to kill myself. That's how much they hate the thoughts, and hate the fear that it's given them. So yeah, getting that support. I think, you described using behavior to help. I mean, I've got a video on this channel, Crisis Coping Skills, where I go through some of my ideas on what to do during these times, so people could check that out. But I think the behavior part can be so helpful. I mean, when I was hit by I sort of had low grade depression. I mean, I had OCD all my life. So, earliest memory 6. I remember OCD from that time all the way through. And I had like a sort of more low grade depression, like flat affect, numb. I had a lot of depersonalization, but I never had the real intense depression for whatever reason. As I was growing up, I was sort of protected against that. And it was only near the end of my intense journey with OCD, before I had improvement in my recovery, that I hit the real intense depression and suicide for me. But it was interesting. I had done so much compulsive reading about mental health as a compulsion, and bought, endless books, and I was trying to solve and fix all, everything that was going on. I knew so much about depression. As it was starting to grip me, I was like, whatever you do, Johnny, keep moving. Do not lie in bed. Do not, I was going into a job that I could hide, and no one knew how depressed I was, and I was sat there having intrusive thoughts about suicide all day. I could hide in that job, but I was like, I must get myself there. I was, feeling panic on traveling on the public transport and all that. And I was just like, get yourself there. And I used this metaphor at that point of like an endurance event. I felt like it was like, I'm running this endurance event, and how do I keep myself moving, keep going, keep doing stuff. And that was helpful, and I think it probably stopped me slipping more deeply into that. And I didn't tell anyone. I had so much shame about OCD, and then even more about this. I don't think I ever told anyone how intense the suicidal thoughts were and everything at that time. I think I mentioned depression, but underplayed it a bit to a couple of people. So yeah, I think your behavior stuff, and in ACT we would talk about urge surfing. So when I'm working with clients with these sorts of difficulties, it's how do you surf that urge of inactivity and isolation, and like you can feel right, like you can barely move. It's literally you're almost catatonic, right? And how can you wake the body up, get the body moving, stand up, break it in. I used to break it into tiny steps. So I'd be like, get out of bed is, open my eyes, look around, get into my body a bit, sit up, sit on the edge of my bed, stand up. Each of those was like a step to focus on and try to do. So it's like, can you urge surf? And I've worked with people where they can't even do all of this. And then what we'll do is just observe the mind, at least start to be mindful of what it's doing, try to get a bit of distance. And sometimes I had one client that was totally stuck in bed, and had made a suicide attempt before we worked together. and we just got her like watching her mind, and eventually it's like it broke open, and then she was like, I can get up and I can get out of bed. And then it was like, oh, I can go back to yoga, I can go and see people, even though I'm still very depressed. So it's like, can you interrupt that behavior and then get yourself doing the supportive things? It's very hard to do when you're in that place. Unbearable. I mean, I used to feel like you're dragging yourself through quicksand, you got this unbearable heavy pain and numbness. And like for me, it was like sadness that won't break, so it's like trapped sadness and these ongoing, thoughts about you should kill yourself and there's no hope and you're stuck. And it's like, how do you sort of get yourself out of that quicksand and just get moving? Um,
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that when you're in that state, the shame component of being weak and
yeah,
not good enough is so huge, but that's just a given. And that's what I tell myself when I get into those spaces. I haven't been in quite some time, but when I am in a space where depression is there, and I'll explain a little bit more about my first or my suicide attempt, but um inevitable it's not just the I like you said, I'm trudging through quicksand, I can't move. It is the I don't deserve to move.
yes, yes,
I
that's
am less
true. Yeah.
than, I am a burden on
Mm,
society. I can't, and just like you said, it's what I try to do. Well, what I one of the things I do is I just remind myself that everything is temporary. You've gotten out of this before, you'll get out of it again. And the thing I always remind myself is you have to get as comfortable as you can get in where how you're feeling now. So it is
yeah,
just
yeah,
absolute radical acceptance. And I have
yeah,
to practice it because I have
yes,
to tell
yeah,
myself, you are likely not going to feel better for 5 days and then we'll
yeah,
reevaluate. And so I kind of give myself a buffer of like, okay, 5 days. And then it is just, I don't anticipate that I'm going to feel any different, but I set
mm,
goals.
yeah,
I'm going to brush my teeth. I'm going to walk the dogs because I have to. I'm going to walk around the block. And what tends to happen, and this is a really powerful practice for me, is I'll put it in a visual for you. So the way that I try to think about it is when I'm in that spot, I feel like I'm stuck in a dark bubble and I'm like I'm in, you know, like that position where I just like
yeah,
my whole body is like
yeah,
this and I can't see anything.
yeah,
And when I get in that space and I have to surrender, which of course is
yeah,
horrible, so
yeah, yeah,
radical acceptance of where I'm at, what I try to do is I try to think to myself, okay, if I fight, the bubble gets smaller.
mm,
And so to not fight is to radically accept where I'm at
yeah,
and embrace that I'm going to embrace where I'm at the best that I can and do
mm,
little goals each day. And what eventually happens is the more I embrace that and get as comfortable as I can in feeling
yeah,
that way, the bubble gets bigger,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Instead of
mm,
me needing the sunlight to come to me, the bubble
yeah,
gets bigger and the light starts
yeah,
coming in. And that's the way that I try to visualize it.
yeah,
And usually I can work my way out of it in 3 or 4 days.
yeah, yeah,
And a lot of that is um, showing myself that I'm still capable of doing things. I'm still capable of walking the dog. I'm still capable of driving to the store. Even if I don't go in, I can drive to
mm,
the store and drive home. And
mm,
then the interesting thing too, when I do this is, and I always find this with radical acceptance, is that in knowing that things are going to be really bad for 4 or 5 days, I all of a sudden find like little glimpses of joy.
yeah,
Like I
yeah,
may laugh about something or I may smile about something. And then I'm like, oh, it reminds me that I am human
mm, yeah,
and that this is just temporary, but it's also part of being human.
yeah,
Um, and so it in those little things start to string together. I may
mm,
find on day
mm,
one and day two they're minimal, but on day three, I've laughed twice. Maybe I'm watching
yeah,
Seinfeld or something and I laugh. and
yeah,
then day four, I find myself smiling at something my dog did, and it's kind of like, oh my God, that's right.
yeah,
Like I can
yeah,
endure this dark place and the
yeah.
darkness will fade and the light will come back in. And then
Mm,
this weird existential, it's kind of like this is what it means to be human. This is what it
yeah,
means to embrace every part of who we are. It cannot be light all the time.
yeah.
I'm not saying that I enjoy that dark space, but it certainly is a reminder, A, that I can get through just
Mm,
about anything.
yes,
A lot of
yes,
that has to do with radically accepting the moment and showing my brain I can endure this pain.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think it sounds like you've built more and more confidence that you can do that and you know what supports you and helps you. And I think that, it makes me think of a big principle for me with this is often it's like the depression and suicidality by extension is like a resistance that OCD can put up when we stop listening to the OCD and we get better at accepting intrusive thoughts, not doing compulsions in maybe an anxious form or perhaps a different type of form of OCD. It's like the threat system then goes, I'm going to give you a load of depression, and that's going to make you do avoidance because you're not listening to the anxiety. So let's give you depression, and that's going to push you into avoidance. And so for me, the first time I was hit by that, and it was also complicated by coming on and off antidepressants and other things. And yeah, I'll put one note in there. Just go very slowly with anything there. I think that one of the antidotes is very slow tapers on, off, changing things, whatever you're doing with a psychiatrist, with your doctor, just do it even slower and just be very, very patient and take your time. But I didn't know that at the time, and that gave me a lot more suicidal thoughts in those sort of transitions between medications. But I think when I first got hit by it, I was like, oh my God, I've just gotten better at accepting anxiety and the forms it was taking with that. And like, now I've got this. Like, how am I going to cope with this? This feels just unbearable. And then I was like, I've got to do the same thing like you're describing. I've got to learn to radically accept these feelings. I've got to learn to be able to observe these thoughts and not buy them and not believe them and be able to let them come and go. And without rumination, without, mental compulsion and control my attention and get really good at focusing when I'm in this state. And then I started practicing that. And then it got to a place where even the bleakest, I mean, I was having a lot of existential OCD mixed in with this. So my brain was like, everything's pointless and meaningless. You should kill yourself. Or you don't feel love and happiness. You should, then they're myths, they're biological programming, or like all kinds of existential stuff. It was telling me to tell me that. And I remember just getting this experience of like, because it had gone from what if it's like that? Oh God, I hope it's not like that to it is like this. Reality is like this. And when I got the first experiences of like these thoughts going from there to there, and like this is just my brain doing brain shit again. It's just overreacting and getting all confused and tangled up. And I can just observe it. I don't need to listen to it. I don't need to respond to it. It can be there. I don't need it to go either. I can live with it being there. It all got a lot easier. And then for me now, I'll sometimes get thoughts like that. And it often corresponds actually when something in life has gone wrong. And it's like my brain's expression of any
Yes.
any setback, any sadness is to go bleak and existential. And I know I don't trust that voice. I can observe that much like you. I know it'll change, it'll shift, it'll pass. The more I don't feed it with rumination and compulsion and monitoring that state as well. That's another big one is like
Yes.
attention's on it and locked on it. I'm checking, I'm worrying, I'm resenting it. The more I soften all of that, let go of that, then it's like it's more a wave. And actually, I can have times where I find it interesting that my brain does that, or it's like isn't it fascinating? My poor little brain is just going this extreme over someone said something mean to me or something like that. It's like, wow, brain, you've really gone out off the track here. So yeah, I mean, I think it is, like you're saying, it's learning those skills to radically accept and trust and have confidence that it'll pass within a timeline, and getting confident with whatever that timeline is, and knowing that you can handle it. And that sort of determination, and then the behavior. I mean, so many useful things in what you said. It's awesome.
Yeah. I
Mm,
when it's I also think that with OCD especially, because we get, the urgency of needing things to go away, and you
mm,
saying resentment really, I just thought, yes, that's, we it's the fight to want it to go. And again, it comes back to I'm trapped in my brain. And I think that's what makes OCD is so horrible, because you can't just kick
mm,
your feet up at the end of the day,
yeah,
and take a
yeah,
break from it. And so then it's this, and I, see clients like this all the time, and I get this way as well and have been with OCD. It's just the urgency that it's never going to and you don't even have to have just right OCD. It's never going to
yeah,
feel
yeah,
whatever your baseline is.
yeah.
Again, but in that also, and I should mention this, 6 months before I attempted suicide, my cousin died, and he
Mm,
was one of my best friends, and that was a huge
mm,
grief blow. And
yeah,
and not processing that, not
mm,
but when I'm depressed 4 months later, 4, 5, 6 months later, I don't attribute it to that, because my brain is sitting
mm,
here telling me like, you're being punished by God, you want to have sex with your family and you're gay. Yeah.
mm.
Like my brain's telling me all
Lovely
this,
combo. Mm,
and I'm not able to see that this is a direct result of the
yeah,
unprocessed grief. I'm holding up
yeah,
this major mental illness on my shoulders, and grief just buries me. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
I think also with OCD, we tend to just fixate on this momentary, oh my gosh, I have to get rid of this,
yeah.
instead of kind of this long-term recovery vision. You know,
Mm,
what are things that trigger us? And
mm,
when they happen, like major life stuff that triggers us, when they happen, I can expect that OCD is going to show up within 3 months.
yeah,
What long-term recovery, what times of the month trigger me? What times of the year trigger me? Because
yeah,
sometimes I think that unless I do feel like relapse teaches us this over and over and over, and we finally can get it. But I
yeah,
do think a lot of times we just grit our teeth, hoping that OCD won't show up, when
yeah,
the knowledge that OCD is going to show up is right there. It's our
yeah.
refusal to believe that it
Mm,
will. And
mm,
the reason why is we are so afraid to suffer.
yeah. Go back there. Go back to that place. Yeah.
And
Mm,
so in relapsing, and then where I got to where I have this different relationship with suicidal ideation, you know, it did get to this place where it was like, Chrissy, you can either look at this, Pat. I mean, first of all, it was radical acceptance that I had this disorder for the rest of my life,
yeah,
which was hard. That took decades.
yeah,
But you can either look at this for when it's going to show up, or you can still wake up every day and hope it doesn't show up, and be down the spiral sometimes for 3 months before you even know. And I
yeah,
think that transition, number one, has to come when you're ready. So
yeah,
a lot of people need to go into denial, and that's okay. But
yeah,
then you'll relapse, and then you're going to have to face it again. But number
yeah.
two, it helps when you know people that have OCD, and
Mm,
you can feel validated in your experience, see that they have hit rock bottom at
yeah,
times, or really struggled and come back and live, and can be happy, and that can move through. And so that's why I think, again, community is so important.
yeah,
I do think that it is okay if you have effective treatment and you're very low in symptoms, or if you feel like you've gone into a little bit of a remission for a while, yeah, go out and enjoy it. And, if you need to think that OCD is never going to come back and you keep it at arm's length, great.
yeah.
Because I did that for a really long time. Although
Mm, mm,
OCD came
mm.
back over and over and over, I just didn't know it because I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of practicing acceptance. But it's going to
Mm,
come back. And when it
yeah,
does, that's when you really want to start saying, okay, what is it that what triggers OCD? And I'm not talking about today, what's going to trigger my OCD tomorrow. I'm talking about
Mm,
I'm going into the holidays.
yeah.
The holidays always trigger my OCD. So I can just
Mm,
anticipate I'm going to experience heightened anxiety December and January. And now that I
yeah.
know that, I'm not going to resent it. I'm not going to
Mm,
fight. I'm actually just
yeah.
going to be like, there it is. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not going to have as much power over me. And I
You're on
think,
the front foot, right? You're on the
yes,
front foot against it. That half the problem with OCD is it catches you out. You don't even notice it started, and then you're deep in it. But you're describing
right.
like I'm on the front foot with this. Yeah.
I'm driving the bus.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, no, I think it's it's like, and relapse can drive suicidal behavior because the sense that,
Absolutely.
oh, I'll never escape this, and hopeless. But can we take it as you're describing? Can we learn through it actually, and can we learn to deepen that radical acceptance, deepen the skill set of coping with it? Can we learn? Um, what caught me out? How did I miss this? Is there a way I can be on the front foot ahead of time?
And
Um,
are we overlooking the just how grieve worthy it
mhm,
is to finally accept, yes, I'm going to have this the rest of my life.
yeah,
It's okay. Again, changing your relationship with suicidal ideation. It is okay to feel
yeah,
very sad and down and blue, and to experience suicidal ideation around the
yeah,
idea that you are going to have OCD the rest of your life.
yeah,
Grief is part of the acceptance process.
yeah,
And a
yeah,
lot of people, I think, don't believe that they're allowed to grieve. They don't believe they
mm,
deserve to grieve. And many people, I think, don't even know they're grieving.
mm, mm,
And I
mm,
think
mm,
grief is it's such an important part of the healing process and a
yeah,
necessary part of acceptance.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And they may never have had grief modeled for them, and actually very toxic models of,
Yes.
when the grief process is happening, actually, no, you shouldn't, whatever relative wouldn't want you to be sad, or
Right.
can't cry at a funeral, or other losses in life, pull yourself together, other people got it harder,
Yes.
we may never have learned the process of emotionally feeling grief and allowing it to move through stages and not getting trapped in resentment. And then, so again, why community, why therapy is so helpful in learning to process that grief if you've never had a blueprint for that.
Exactly. And I do think that, I get a lot of people doing peer support and in my community that are in that stage. It
Yeah.
is it is the I thought that I was done with OCD. I thought this was over. I've relapsed. I'm so sad. I'm so scared that this is like, and I'm like, come on in and
Yeah.
meet all of these other wonderful people who have felt the same way or are feeling that way. And all of a sudden you're building like this foundation that whenever OCD hits, you slide down to the foundation,
Yeah.
that, okay, I can stand up again with all of these other people because they
Yeah.
know there is just such power in people who get it without even
Yeah.
having to explain.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think sometimes it's the messaging problem in ERP makes this worse because clinicians want to reinforce it's the most evidence gold standard treatment and it has good outcomes and it can help you. And they really want to emphasize that, but then in doing that they don't mention the complexities of long-term recovery. And there might be some relapse prevention sort of psychoeducation, but there's not often it is portrayed as like, and I sometimes think it's like having its cake and eat it. It's like on the one hand portrayed as like 12 session protocols. You can have these long lasting effects. And, as long as you just are ready with your ERP, you'll never, you can get to subclinical and remission and it's portrayed. And then on the other hand, you'll hear them saying, you've got to learn to tolerate symptoms. You've got to live alongside it. Inhibitory learning, we're learning different associations rather than habituating. And so I feel that sometimes the messaging is confusing. And then if you haven't had a simplistic recovery that then has lasted, it then messes people up because they're like, there must be something wrong with me, or I can't recover,
Yes,
or I'm back to where I was and worse. So it obviously doesn't work, or, and then sometimes they've been shamed by clinicians saying it's sort of your fault or you're treatment
right.
resistant, rather than it's a hard process. It's a messy process. You can get to a better and better place in recovery, but it's an ongoing journey, and it takes a lot of um, practice and support and learning to sort of get there.
Well, I often say to people that the biggest challenge in recovery is recognizing and believing that it's OCD when OCD shows up. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
when I had sexual intrusive, I had mainly sexual intrusive thoughts, religious scrupulosity.
yeah,
And so I was just used to the groinal. And so then when
yeah,
I would get the groinal after effective treatment, I could safely
mm,
assume that it was OCD.
yeah,
But when it turned to violent intrusive thoughts or a
mm,
relationship themed OCD, I had no clue it was OCD
yeah,
because I wasn't
yeah.
getting the groinal.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. And the
so
pattern of symptoms that you are used to, or the
yes,
presentation of it, yeah, yeah, it can catch you
yes.
out massively. And I got caught out over and over. And yeah, I think you've got to be humble and say you can always get caught out. Like I like to say, I'm confident in my recovery skills, and I'm confident I can cope with it if it gets bad, and I can get through those times. But I don't know, and I could easily be caught out. And I notice at times my brain trying to go for things and trying to, and you can get better, hopefully, at catching some of that. But like you're saying, it can also blindside you. And, that's where you have to be realistic. And you learned from that, right? I admire that, each of these phases you've been through with your OCD, you've learned stuff, right? Including the pain stuff recently. And, yeah, I mean, they're
Well,
hard lessons to learn, but yeah.
that one actually is a great example from a suicidal perspective. I recently, I would say it was about 6 years ago that it started. I was having foot pain, and it was just a stress injury, like stress from holding stress, and my feet were I was
Mm,
getting like arthritis in my toes, which now I have for good. Um,
mm.
but
I've got it in my right big toe, so I'm right there with you.
oh, it's awful.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so I am a runner. And so I was running and it was just so painful. And so I went to my PT and she was just like, "Oh, you're not injured. This is just like a stress injury. So just make sure you're yada, yada, yada." And, but my OCD latched right onto that pain, just
Mm,
like it would onto health anxiety. And
yeah.
so it day in and day out, Johnny, all I thought about was the pain. I would sit on the couch and I would think, I'm gonna get up and get some water, and oh my God, is it gonna hurt? I'll never be able to run again. And this went on
Mm,
for 3 years. And the thing is that I would catch myself going, I think this is OCD because I'm ruminating and I'm Googling all the time. But then
yeah,
my insight was so low because the pain was so real.
yeah,
I
yeah.
could not, the meta OCD it wasn't even meta OCD. I just was like, this can't be OCD. And one day, it
Mm,
was about a year and a half in, we had just gone out for sushi, and my quality of life was very low at this point.
mm,
I was isolating and avoiding all the things that I love to do. I wasn't doing anymore because I was scared of the pain.
yeah.
And um, I was sitting in the parking lot because I did not want to go in the grocery store and walk around to feel the pain. And this old lady walked out and she had a cane. She looked like she was like 95. And she's like wobbling to the car. And I start crying. And I was
Mm,
like, I'm gonna be 90 years old, and walking out of the grocery store in pain. And I just think I should go home and kill myself tonight. And I
yeah.
started thinking of ways of killing myself. And I was like,
Mm,
it took me just a few minutes. And then I was like, oh my God, Chrissy, what
yeah.
who would kill themselves over their foot that's not even injured?
Mm,
I mean, it
Mm,
is, but it wasn't.
yeah.
I thought I just, and then I started crying even harder. I just thought this is OCD.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is, and then
Mm,
I will say I went right back into symptoms the next day. My insight was so
mm,
low that,
mm,
and the physical symptoms were so high. I could not. And so that continued for another year and a half until
yeah.
again, I felt severely suicidal. It was a few
Mm,
days worth of suicidal ideation, and I finally had to tell someone.
yeah.
And it was my
Yeah.
husband, my ex-husband at the time, and I told him, and
Mm,
he said, Chrissy, this is your OCD. He was like,
mm,
you're, and he said, what compulsions are you doing? And so when I started naming them
mm,
off, it was like him having to say to me, this is your OCD and you need to take control of it. So I actually went to my PT who's very aware of OCD, and
yeah.
she did exposure exercises with me on my feet.
Mm, yeah.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't even my actual therapist, it was my PT. And she was like, you need to do this at
Mm,
home moving
yeah.
forward. And that's how I got through it. And a lot of it was, and I think this is good for when you are in low insight, a lot of
Yeah.
it was just making the choice to get out and do life again, even if I
Yeah.
didn't believe that it
Yeah.
was OCD and it was going to get better. And
Yeah.
it was my PT that was basically like, you can either go out and live life and believe believe it is or isn't OCD, or you can stay in
Mm,
and have your life
mm,
pass you by and be miserable. And she was like, I need you to make the choice every day to
yeah.
get out
Yeah.
of the house. And that's what got me out of low insight and got me out of that
Yeah.
suicidal ideation,
Yeah.
was just living
Yeah.
life, even though I didn't
Yeah.
believe OCD.
Mm. And a lot of people, will get suicidal over pain, and injuries and the projection of that. And I think this is probably a more common OCD theme than we perhaps realize. You don't see it listed in
But
books that often or talked about. I'm sure I've had
people don't know it's OCD.
yeah, I've had a few clients with it
Yeah.
with back injuries often, and
Yes.
concern over back problems, and I think it's interesting as well in the pain world. Some of the treatment now that's evolving is the same. It's like graded exposure to pain, and
Yes.
it's sort of similar sorts of ideas. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, there were a couple of things, definitely a couple more things I was interested to talk through. I think we've mentioned the function. You talked about problem solving the pain. I think there are other functions I wanted to mention, and I think it can be worth not in a rumination way, but ideally with a therapist looking at the function of these suicidal thoughts. So, is it problem solving the pain, or is it actually our brain wants certainty, even if it's a very painful reality? It doesn't want to live in the uncertainty, so it would rather know there's no hope and it's all going to be awful forever, and then it comes out of that. It's like the brain's attempt to get that certainty, even the worst case scenario. Is it very social functioning, and it's all to do with our interpersonal relationships? Either our brain's trying to signal to invalidate in people how much pain we're in because they're not believing us and they're not getting it, or that there's some kind of interpersonal function. Sometimes I see it's like our brain's attempt to get us to give up on goals. And really, here, the goals could be recovery, the goals could be what we were doing in life. And the brain's going, too much energy, too much resources, give up, and it pushes us into depression that then cycles into the suicidality. And the other one, yeah, the communicating pain to others, I said. The other one I wanted to say was there's one theory that suicidality could be an ancient mechanism in humans, which is literally to deburden the tribe. So it's an ancient mechanism in us that's like, if we feel we are in this hopeless situation, we get an urge to deburden the tribe. So again, we don't want some ancient evolutional mechanism that doesn't realize we've got a tribe. We're just in the wrong tribe. We're not in the tribe that wants us, driving us into suicide. We need to find the tribe that wants us. So I always think that's an interesting theory. It's a theory, but it's from respected academics. So yeah.
I think that it's just interesting to know the functionality of
Yeah.
suicidal ideation, because again, that just gives you more of a reason to stand up and have agency when it's
Yeah.
happening. You
Yeah.
know, I think that, again, to go back to the original point that I made, that it's so taboo.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
taboo to even talk about,
Yeah.
much less experience. And
Yeah.
so, to experience that and then be like, I mean, I know it's difficult when you're in it, but also it's difficult to do ARP when you're in OCD, but you can still
Yeah.
choose to do it. And
Yeah.
but to be able to have that experience and have those feelings and take a step back and objectively say, here's
Yeah.
the functionality of why my brain is doing that.
Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
level of self-compassion, uh,
Yeah.
that you deserve,
Yes. Yes.
because any of those reasons at that point are not your fault.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
do think that we tend to default to, I must be X, Y, and Z because I'm having suicidal thoughts. When in
Mm.
reality, if you're experiencing suffering to the degree that your brain is actually saying, well, don't worry, Chrissy, there's always the option of killing yourself to
Yeah.
stop the pain and not be trapped your whole life. I mean, if you think about just a rational being talking to you
Yeah.
like that, you can just say back, yeah, that is an option, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to choose that today.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that is the kind of talk that I give myself when I am
Hmm.
in that. When I had a suicidal night like about a month and a half ago. It was about a 2 hour night and suicide crossed my mind. And while it scared me, again, I just said, well, I need some light to make this decision. I'm not going to make this at 3 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did say to myself, I do think I'm not going to choose suicide today. And to be able to talk back to my
Yeah.
brain in such a
Yeah.
matter of fact way
Hmm.
did give me a
Hmm.
level of self-compassion,
Yeah.
non-judgment, and I did
Mm.
not feel shamed by it.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And we can infuse that whole self-talk with compassion so we can talk to that suicidal network and be compassionate to it and say, yeah, I know you're trying to help me. You're trying to problem solve the pain here. And, maybe people have let me down and other things. At the same time, I can get through this. This will pass. Let's see it in the morning. All the things you're
Yeah,
saying, like how can we delay it and move through that? And I think, the function can point us at values. So, if the function is about escaping pain, the flip side of that is that we want a meaningful life. We want pleasure and satisfaction and connection and all the kind of opposite of pain. So how can we build up our life to maybe we need to slow down and savor aspects of life. You won't be able to do that when you're depressive, but you can work on the behavior and start to build that capacity back up over time. Or I need more social connection. If it's a social function, then it isn't going to convey to these people that are invalidating us what we think it will. It won't. They'll dismiss it as that was that
correct.
person with mental health problems. Actually, the better way to get your to express to them is to recover, build better connections, and either build a new life away from those people or to assertively speak back to them and send them a letter or talk to them or do whatever you need to do. But it isn't by taking yourself away from that tribe. It's by finding a new tribe. So you can
Correct.
find kind of values in the function, I think. And another one for values is like, why have we not done it? And that will point us at our values. Often it is family or friends or people. Okay, let's start focusing on social connection again and, move in that value direction. But if it's more pain relief, okay, well, I need to take care of myself. I need to start doing things to look after my well-being, and I need to do all the, whatever self-caring behaviors I can start to do to look after myself to relieve that pain. And, so I think it can, the flip side of it, we can find values and then we can start to try to build action plans to live that way. And that can be very helpful.
And I do think it's worth mentioning that this can also become a whole different beast with the taboo intrusive thoughts.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You
And
wouldn't want to do that. You don't think you're worthy of that sort of life. And yeah.
right. And the
Yeah.
burden piece, or
Mm,
if if you are isolated with taboo, intrusive thoughts, you can't tell anybody,
mm,
whatever. Sometimes we think we don't have anywhere to go.
yeah,
And if you're listening to this right now, you're seeing that you do have somewhere to go. Like
yes,
you're here.
yes,
I mean, Johnny and
yeah,
I both have OCD. We both
yeah.
met through this community. I mean, my
Both
whole,
have taboo, have had and
right,
have taboo. We both have these themes. It's yeah,
right. I mean, my
mm,
whole world has been um, transformed just by outreaching people that have OCD and building up a community
yeah,
of people who get it. You're
yeah.
never trapped. And
No,
also, in this day and age, you have even more access to people
yeah,
around the world that have OCD. And it's so, with taboo intrusive thoughts in particular, it's so important to meet other people that have it. I mean,
yeah,
like, I
yeah,
know with OCD in general, and we don't want to like pitch things against each other, but the shame is different with taboo. And so to
mm,
meet other people who've been through what you are going through is
yeah,
just
yeah,
humanizing
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
we feel like monsters. And
yeah,
so when you see, oh my God, this person looks like a normal person and they have POCD
yeah,
thoughts too, and they
yeah,
have kids and they have a
yes,
family,
mm,
that is going to give you hope.
yes,
Meeting
yes,
lots of people that have been at the bottom and have survived suicide or have been suicidal, and
mm,
now they have tools and can move
mm.
forward and can do the things that we can do to get through that. We are not special. I mean, I think you're special, but
I think
um,
you're special. No, you're
we're
special.
not
No,
we're not special in a way that we
no,
have better
no,
skills than you or we were more lucky than you. It is not that.
no.
And the fact that you're
No,
right.
you'll have a better functioning brain than I have, I'll tell you that. So,
I mean, I think, I think about when I did attempt suicide. I mean, I was trapped in every way possible at that point. I was trapped in my brain. I was trapped in my house. I was trapped,
yeah.
in the people that were around me and my family and everything. And I just didn't know any different.
Mm,
I'm
mm.
telling you, if you're listening, there's always a way to escape,
Yeah, yeah.
and there's always a way to create a different life for yourself.
Mm, mm.
OCD will tell you that you can't. But the first step maybe is reaching out to one of us.
Yeah.
Reaching out. I have a whole community of people. I have a YouTube channel. You can interact with people on there. You can interact with Johnny's, people on
Mm,
Johnny's. You just even having a chat conversation with someone who says, "Oh man, I get it," can
yeah.
change everything.
Yeah, completely, completely. I mean, I was alone going through it, and would tell my younger self not to be alone going through that. That would have helped so much to have not been alone going through it. I met people when I was doing better in my recovery. That's when I connected with people with OCD. It would have been so helpful to have those connections earlier. And yeah, I mean, I think, we can obviously wrap this up in a moment, but on the taboo point, if you're listening to this thinking because of the content of my thoughts and what I've lost insight and I'm believing it, and because of that I don't deserve to live, you know, get help, work with a specialist on OCD that understands sexual intrusive thoughts, taboo themes, whatever the theme, harm themes, whatever it is. And, a lot of people, this is something I take every opportunity to say, they are being really pushed into that low insight because they read accounts of OCD that don't fit the complexity of what they're going through. So if you listen to this, your OCD has probably gotten very complex and layered, and you've been doing so much compulsions that you've lost insight. You're probably in that kind of place. I mean, anyone, with that sort of link to suicidal behavior is going to have lost insight, and you need help to unpick that and to really realize that,
Right.
you can't trust the content of your thoughts, your body, your emotions, your compulsions as evidence of anything. You need to get out of those and work with someone to help you.
You are not the exception.
Yeah.
Yours is not any different than anybody else's. Your images aren't different. Your groinal's not different.
No, no.
You've had a real event. You've had something
Yeah.
happen childhood that's sexual and you think you don't deserve it, no, 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 you do.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
to my YouTube channel and watch my videos with Johnny Say, Unreal Event
Mm.
OCD.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
it's
Exactly.
true,
Yeah.
but like you're not
No
the
different.
exception.
Mm.
Every person thinks they're the exception. Every person that I meet with thinks they don't really have OCD. This and like half the time people try to convince me they don't have it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Mm.
Impulsive. So I
Mm.
just really, same as what Johnny is saying, I really encourage you, if if you're not ready for therapy, because a lot of people aren't because they're scared, take the first step for support. You
Yeah.
know, I am a certified peer support specialist. I am non-judgmental. I have heard it
Yeah.
all in my community it's a community of wonderful people from all over the world, and they were scared to take the first step too. I was scared to take the first step. I kept telling my therapist I was lying to him every time I was in
Mm.
session, and he was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, reach out to Chrissy, reach out to that community, but also, you can go to a clinician and you can take your time. You don't need to tell them everything right away. You can
yes,
build up to the more complex and difficult things, and you can make sure they understand that before you work with them. But yeah, get help, get support. Do not listen to your brain. That's the thing with OCD and with suicidal thoughts. Our brain is our own worst enemy at this point. And, it's trying to help, it's trying to problem solve the pain, it's trying to, do things for certain functions, but your brain is not something to be believed in this point. Get connected, get doing supportive behaviors and do not listen to it.
yeah, I agree.
Mm.
And Johnny and I are just two people with OCD, and we've both been where you're at.
Yeah.
And we might be again, but
Yeah.
it just takes time and it takes practice, and it
Hmm.
really does. I think I love what you just said. It is your brain trying to protect you, and it's trying to look for all the solutions. But I really want to empower you to just take back the knowledge that it's still your behavior. It's
Yeah.
still you making decisions no
Yeah.
matter what your brain is telling you, if it's screaming at you, of you're a
Yeah.
pedophile or you're this or go kill yourself or whatever, you still are in charge of your
Yeah.
actions. And you can
Yeah.
still say, actually, I'm not going to do that today. And actually, I'm not going to believe that I'm a pedophile, but I'm going to choose to reach out for help or
Yeah.
support or just even look up a therapist's name, take it in
Yeah.
baby steps.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Well, Chrissy, I really appreciate you sharing, your painful journey and making something meaningful out of that and supporting and helping, other people going through this. And I'm always, in awe of your courage and how much you're willing to share with this community to help people and to try to, support people's recovery. So thank you for your time with this. And yeah, if anyone's listening to this, go check out Chrissy's YouTube channel. So many good resources and videos. Check out her community, her books, look into what, there you go. There you go. And yeah, feel free to, give us questions and comments. And thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I always love our chats. I feel like we have very similar journeys and we have a very similar passion to want people to find help and community. So, always a pleasure. Look forward to doing
Yeah.
more. For all of you that are watching, thank you so much for letting me share my story with you, and I hope it was helpful.